The memory of that afternoon stays with me. It lives in the air of my room, thick and unshakable. I was a younger girl then, a ninth-grade student full of artistic energy and focus. Music was the one thing that made my life easy, and the piano was my absolute world. I always followed instructions and spent hours perfectly balancing melody and rhythm. But there was Lisa, a classmate who wore her beauty like a shield and targeted me with an intense, unyielding hatred because of my talent. The tension between us was always pulsing against the backdrop of our daily school life, a silent rivalry that I tried my best to ignore. We spent the weeks leading up to the grand inter-school piano competition in a blur of motion. I watched from the sidelines as my classmates enjoyed their free time, while I transformed into a streak of pure determination, running to the music wing and jumping on every opportunity to practice with infectious focus. It was a stressful time, the kind where the pressure feels like a heavy hand pressing down on your shoulders. The competition was just 3 days away, and I knew I needed every second of preparation I could get. I was in the middle of a high-energy schedule when I decided I needed extra time after hours. I went to find my music teacher, Leon Joseph, to ask for permission to use the grand piano after the regular school day ended. From my position as his student, his guidance looked massive. He was a mentor who dominated my musical world, reaching toward high standards with every lesson. Seeing the upcoming stage from that angle made the challenge look even more powerful and exciting. A spark of intense ambition lit up in my eyes as I requested the extra hours. My teacher granted the permission without hesitation, but he took a serious promise from me to win the trophy and bring honor to the department. I gave him my word, asserting with absolute confidence that I would try my best and give the performance everything I had. As the clock neared 5 in the afternoon, the school day finally reached its end. A group of about 12 students lined up at the main gates to head toward the school buses, their joyful shouts filling the air as they departed for their houses. There was a sign posted regarding building safety near the exit, reminding everyone of closing times. But I turned my back on the doors. I walked thin and almost fragile beneath my heavy school blazer, carrying a lanky frame full of nerves straight toward the isolated music room. The group of departing students finally cleared out, and the main hallways fell completely quiet. I climbed onto the piano bench, the section of the room that traditionally felt the most isolated. For the first hour, I stood about 30 yards away from total isolation because a few other students were practicing their own instruments nearby. I remember thinking for a split second that the distant sounds formed a comforting background, but soon, the machinery of the school day began its rhythmic metallic groan of locking doors. The school began to settle into a slow pendulum of silence against the darkening sky. By the third hour of my practice, something major changed. Every time my fingers reached the apex of a difficult musical piece and plummeted back down onto the keys, my mind seemed to lift too far from reality. My surroundings flailed as if I were trying to catch the normal passage of time, but it wasn't there. I wasn't practicing with joy anymore. I was racing against the clock, completely swallowed by the mechanical roar of my own focus and the echoing chords in front of me. To the rest of the world, I was just a silhouette in an empty building. I was actually making a desperate attempt to find absolute perfection on the smooth fiberglass keys, entirely unaware that the building had emptied out completely. I saw my reflection for a fleeting second when I finally paused and looked straight ahead at the dark windows. My eyes were wide, fixed on the cloudy sky outside, as if I were already falling into a deep sense of panic. The physics of the empty school were working against my confidence. On my next movement, the momentum of fear became too much. The gap between my calm body and my racing thoughts widened until there was nothing left to hold my composure. I packed my heavy bag, realizing that the only person left on the property besides me was likely John, the school guard. Before making the long trek home in the darkening weather, I realized I had to use the washroom badly, so I hurried down the quiet corridor. The impact of the silence was sickening. When I reached the washroom and saw myself straight in the mirror, my heart shattered instantly. From the floor to the ceiling, the room felt charged, and I felt an intense sensation that someone was watching me from the darkness. I hurried into a toilet stall and locked the door to find some privacy. Just 10 seconds passed before a heavy, rhythmic knock sounded on the wooden barrier. I was confused and tried to convince myself that my mind was simply assuming things due to exhaustion. But just after that, the heavy knocking happened again, much louder this time. I was so scared that I screamed out for John, hoping the school guard would answer. There was no response, only an agonizing silence that passed before a low, mocking laugh echoed through the room. I became so completely numbed by terror that I was temporarily unable to open the toilet stall door. I was sweating profusely, my hands shaking as I finally forced the lock open. But as I opened the stall door, the unthinkable happened. Someone violently slammed the washroom main door shut from the outside. I screamed out to ask who was there, my voice swallowed by the hollow walls, and yanked the main door open to give chase. Through the dim hallway, I caught a fleeting second of a girl in a long black dress running straight inside the music room. I followed her into the room, only to find that the lights had been completely turned off, which surprised me since she had just entered. I took about 10 or 15 hesitant steps inside the room, and suddenly the door behind me locked with a heavy click. Then, an unrhythmic, chaotic sound of piano keys started playing wildly in the dark. I was frozen to the spot. I could see the silhouette of the black dress woman wandering across the room, moving directly toward the light switchboard. As she switched on the fluorescent light and turned around to face me, the full nightmare was revealed. Staring straight at me was a creepy, wrinkled, and terrifying face. Instantly, my legs gave out and I fell hard onto the ground. From that position on the floor, I watched as the figure reached up and removed the creepy mask, revealing that the black dress woman was actually Lisa. I was still entirely frozen, my mind unable to process the cruelty of the trick. She had engineered the entire scene to destroy my spirit before the big day. Since that day, I have been facing severe, involuntary Tourette's episodes triggered by that intense fright. It was a malicious prank that Lisa wanted, and she never faced any big punishment for what she did. Instead, the blame fell elsewhere. The school principal was furious about the entire incident and fiercely scolded Joseph Sir for his lack of supervision, telling him directly that he had no right to leave me unattended and should have been present in the music wing that evening. But the scolding did not change my reality. I look down at my hands now, which are stained with the memory of that failure. My breathing is shallow as I realize my musical dream is dead. Staring at the empty space where my confidence used to be, I think bitterly about how I never won the competition for my teacher. There was a thread on the main page asking cops if they have ever experienced anything creepy or odd at a crime scene. I posted the following story, and some people said I should submit it over here. I'm new here, so be gentle. This is the entire post, but the second story is the one that got the most attention. I've seen a lot of suicides, but one sticks out. This elderly female had her adult daughter living with her. She called us because she hadn't seen her daughter for 2 days and hadn't heard her moving around upstairs. The stairway going up was very narrow, and at the top was a direct 90-degree turn into the bedroom. The mother was too elderly to climb the stairs, so she called us. We get there and enter the bedroom and find the daughter dead. She hung herself by tying the rope from her robe around her neck and the other end to the bedpost. Then she just laid on the floor and let her weight compress the rope. Seemed odd because she could have easily just sat up or lifted herself up to keep from being strangled. Almost wouldn't thought her body would have done it on its own as a defense mechanism. Anyway, we untie her and check vitals, but she's gone. We need to check the body for signs of trauma, so we do that. As we're turning her over, the air escapes from her lungs in a long, soft sigh, and I feel the air blow over my arm. Grossed me out big time. Anyway, we couldn't get her out of the room because the stairway was too narrow. Ambulance arrives, and we strap her to a backboard and lower her out the window and down the ladder of the fire truck. I felt terrible for the mother because she was in hysterics, and her daughter being tossed out the upstairs window with the whole neighborhood watching. I never found out any details about her body afterwards, so I don't know if she took pills and then laid down and passed out, etc. But that method of suicide struck me as very odd. Next, got an alarm call to a home where someone had committed suicide the year before. The house was still owned by the family, but it sat unused. No one lived there. Another officer and I clear the house and advise dispatch that everything is kosher. No forced entry anywhere, but the back door was unlocked. We contacted the owner, and he told us he leaves it unlocked. Whatever. Anyway, we're in the house just looking around, remarking how it's a shame that the house just sits there unused. The other officer goes to take a leak, and I'm standing there in the living room when I hear footsteps upstairs. Now, we check the entire upstairs, each room, every closet, bathroom, etc. My partner yells from the bathroom, asking if those are footsteps. He comes out zipping up and we rush upstairs. Nothing. Doors to the rooms are open. We check each room again, each closet, everywhere. The upstairs is flat out empty. There wasn't even furniture left in the house. He's in one room, and I'm in another when I feel this coldness enter the room. It was just a cold that felt like it encompassed my entire body. Then it was as if someone in front of me shoved me with both hands. It was a very distinct feeling of two hands shoving me backwards by pushing my chest. I'm a cop. Normally someone shoves you and it's game on. But this time there was no one there, just an empty room. I must have sat there with a stupid look on my face for maybe a second or two. Then I left the room completely creeped out. I met my buddy in the hallway and he tells me I look weird. I explained to him exactly what had just happened, and he agrees that the place is incredibly creepy, suggesting that we leave immediately. It was daytime, and the house was fully lit, as there were no curtains or shades on any of the windows. Later, I told my supervisor about it, and he mentioned that he had responded to an alarm call there as well, and as soon as he went inside, he got that same creepy feeling where it feels like you're being watched. This story takes place in Santa Clarita, which is known as one of the safest towns in America. At the time these events happened, I was between 10 and 17 years old. I am 19 now. For some context, my family lived in a 2-story house. There were 2 bedrooms downstairs and 3 bedrooms upstairs. My family consisted of my mom, dad, older brother, older sister, 5 dogs, and me, the youngest child. One thing my family always believed was that my sister and I had what they called a third eye, because we seemed able to predict many things before they happened. This story, however, is only about the strange spirits we experienced in that house. Everything started shortly after we moved in. One night while taking a shower, I saw a little girl around 6 or 7 years old standing outside. She had long black hair and wore white pajamas. When I got out, she ran toward my sister's room and disappeared. That same night I saw her again in a dream. In the dream, she introduced herself as Alice and explained that she needed help from both me and my sister. According to her, there were 2 bad men she wanted us to get rid of. I agreed to help, but first she wanted my sister to be able to see her as well. Not long afterward, strange things started happening in my sister's room. Her stuffed animals would be moved around. My sister noticed the changes and wondered how they were happening. I told her about Alice and explained that Alice wanted to communicate with her. My sister was frightened by the idea, but later that night she also encountered Alice. After that experience, she agreed to help. Alice made one final request. She wanted us to keep everything secret. According to her, if we told anyone else, they would also become aware of her and the 2 men. Not long after that, I saw one of the men for the first time. I had gone to the bathroom late at night. While walking back to my room, I looked toward the loft and saw a very tall figure standing there. He looked as if he were covered by a white sheet. The moment I saw him, I was overwhelmed with fear, anxiety, and dread. The feeling was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. The figure began moving toward me. I immediately ran to my room, shut the door, and started crying. The terror I felt was overwhelming. After that night, I questioned whether helping Alice was worth it at all. I continued seeing the figure for months. He often appeared to chase me, and every encounter filled me with fear. Eventually, the stress became too much, and I told my family. To my surprise, they believed me. Many of them had already been feeling a strange pressure in the house. Everyone seemed more stressed than usual, and none of us could explain why. Not long after that, my father saw the white figure himself. The figure was standing in a corner of the loft. When it turned and looked at my dad, it frightened him badly. My brother was different from the rest of us. He never actually saw anything in the house. However, he often felt unusual pressure and discomfort.
At one point, he even recorded something strange on his phone. The video appeared to show what he believed was my guardian angel opening his bedroom door and checking on me. Sadly, that phone was later destroyed in an accident, so the recording was lost forever. My mother seemed able to communicate with the white figure, although she later remembered none of those conversations. One day, my sister saw our mother talking to empty air and heard a deep male voice nearby, which frightened her badly. As time passed, my aunt and grandmother moved into the house with us. They soon began experiencing strange events as well. My aunt frequently stayed home alone during the day. She often heard running footsteps upstairs when nobody else was there. She also heard loud thumps, banging sounds, and what sounded like two men having conversation. My grandmother eventually encountered Alice too. Unfortunately, she was unable to communicate with her. One of the strangest experiences happened to my aunt very early one morning. She usually woke up around 4 o'clock to get ready for work. While walking upstairs to use the bathroom, she suddenly collided with something so hard that she nearly fell down. The strange part was that nobody was there. She had not heard anyone approaching, and after the impact, there was no sound of another person moving away. At that point, even the animals in the house seemed affected. All 5 of our dogs regularly stared toward the loft, growling and barking. One day, my poodle came back from upstairs with a badly injured paw that required a cast. Even my friends had experiences in that house. To this day, they still say that spending a night in our loft was one of the scariest experiences of their lives. There were 4 of them. They visited shortly after the strange activity began. I let them sleep in the loft. The next morning, all of them described seeing the same tall, white-sheeted man throughout the night. They said he constantly harassed and frightened them. Unlike me, they claimed to have seen his face clearly. According to them, part of his face looked severely damaged, almost as if half of it had been cut away. My friends continued visiting on weekends after that, but they refused to go anywhere near the loft again. As time went on, I started having disturbing dreams. In these dreams, I repeatedly witnessed Alice's death. The white-sheeted figure would take her to another man. This second man wore a dirty suit and looked extremely disorganized. He wore gloves with long blades attached to them, similar to something from a horror movie. In every vision, he attacked Alice. The same scene repeated itself over and over. Eventually, I saw this second man while awake. To reach the shower, I had to cross the loft area. One day, I saw him there. He crawled on all 4s and stared directly at me. His presence felt even more evil than the white figures. Although he never chased anyone, seeing him was terrifying, especially when he crawled along walls and ceilings. After he began appearing regularly, my father started seeing him too. The encounters became so frequent that my dad eventually stopped sleeping upstairs. Instead, he moved downstairs because he was tired of seeing the figure in his room. My sister reached her limit first. The constant stress became too much for her. She decided she no longer wanted anything to do with Alice or the situation surrounding the 2 men. After making that decision, she never saw Alice again. For me, things were not much better. I felt exhausted and emotionally drained. Seeing the figures over and over had taken a serious toll on me. Eventually, I also decided that I was finished. I was 15 years old at the time. When I mentally said goodbye to Alice, she appeared sad and disappointed. I did not want her to leave, but I could not continue anymore. Soon after that, she disappeared. That was the last time I ever saw Alice. It was also the last time I saw either of the 2 men. Afterward, the activity in the house seemed to calm down. Unfortunately, my family began falling apart. My parents divorced after a major conflict involving my brother. He nearly died while attending college, and disagreements surrounding that event created wounds that never fully healed. My sister struggled with severe depression, bipolar disorder, and trauma connected to everything she had experienced. As for me, the years of fear, stress, and personal problems pushed me to a breaking point. I eventually developed paranoid schizophrenia. The constant dread I had felt in that house never completely disappeared. Even after the figures were gone, the fear remained. It felt as though all the anger, hatred, and negativity connected to that place had built up over the years and affected everyone who lived there. Eventually, we decided we had to leave. We moved away and started over somewhere else. Thankfully, life slowly improved. My brother recovered and remains in good health. My sister moved to Seattle and began pursuing her dream of becoming a music producer. My parents ultimately decided that living together peacefully worked better for them, despite everything that had happened. As for me, I focused on moving forward with my own life and career. Looking back, that house nearly tore my family apart. We still experience occasional paranormal activity, but nothing like what happened there. If I could give one piece of advice based on my experiences, it would be this: be careful when dealing with spirits. Sometimes they can pull you and everyone around you into situations far beyond your ability to understand or help, and the consequences may be much greater than you expect.
This all happened last night and I have to tell someone. This all takes place last night at my parents' house in Wyoming. It was probably around midnight and I woke up from a deep sleep. My mom was visiting my grandmother for the week due to the virus, and my dad had gone out earlier that night. Anyway, it was late at night and I started hearing noises coming from the hallway. It wasn't regular noises like the house settling. It was rhythmic, like knocking on a door. But instead of a knock, it was a loud, soft creaking. I tried to ignore it, but eventually I started to hear haunting voices calling out my name, repeatedly whispering for Chris. It was getting louder. I've always been very spiritual, and my grandmother says I have the gift. I remember being scared, but I was always very brave for my age. So, I went into the hallway, and the noises did not go away like in the movies. Instead, I could hear them more clearly. There was a faint slapping, as if someone was beating someone, and this loud creaking. I started hearing cries of pain in the night, and that's when I knew that this was an evil spirit. So I grabbed the Holy Bible and started to pray to God in the hallway. The spirits didn't like this, and the noises became louder. They started cursing and shouting harder, and I could hear the beating getting harder, so I knew the ghosts were angry. I've always been smart for my age, and remembered what I had learned on a documentary about ghosts. The thing is that they don't like water. That's why you never hear about hauntings on rainy days. You hear about haunted houses, haunted castles, haunted cars, but never a haunted waterfall. Coincidence? No, ghosts hate water. Anyway, I went downstairs and filled a pink beach pail for sandcastles with water. I bravely went up the stairs and the noises were going crazy. It was like the whole house was practically shaking. I knew it was coming from my parents' room, so I kicked open the door. The lights were off, but I could see all this movement, so I shouted the first thing that came to my mind. I yelled as loud as I could, declaring glory to God in the highest and peace to his people on earth, and threw the water at the ghosts. They were extremely angry. I then ran downstairs and could hear one of the ghosts bolting after me. I hid outside and slept in a tent for the night. The next day, when I came inside, I told my dad about it. He got very quiet and started telling me about how he was hoping I would be a little older before he had to confirm the truth about the ghosts to me. He explained that the ghosts had been haunting our family for generations. Furthermore, he stated that he knew I was special and would eventually start hearing them. He claimed that he wasn't home at all that night and didn't come home until the morning. When I inquired if he knew I wasn't inside the house, he admitted that he had noticed my absence, but he figured I was very mature for my age, so I'd be okay. He firmly told me ghosts are real and have been haunting the house, and emphasized that if that ever happens again, I should just hide under my bed and not come out no matter what. He warned me that the ghosts might hurt me if I go in there and throw water at them again. He promised he would come in and tell me when the ghosts are finally gone. Finally, he strictly instructed me not to tell my mom when she came home, because he didn't want to worry her about them. I finally feel accepted by my dad for being mature enough to be entrusted with this secret, and I hope I can protect my mom from them.
Following a difficult period marked by the loss of my father in Charleston and the end of a relationship, I decided to relocate to Charlotte. I sought a fresh start entirely on my own, desiring the active energy of city life. I found a pleasant apartment featuring a cozy fireplace. The entire place felt welcoming during the initial tour and throughout the moving process. However, that early comfort faded after the first few weeks, replaced by an increasingly unsettling atmosphere. I began experiencing strange sensations during routine moments, such as leaving the shower, changing clothes, or waking up in the middle of the night for a drink of water or to use the restroom. It constantly felt as though I had uninvited guests staying in my main living space. One particular night,
I woke up with the distinct impression that someone was asleep on my couch. The feeling was so convincing that I made sure to put on a shirt and pants before entering the room, entirely unwilling to startle my perceived guest by appearing unclothed. As time progressed, I grew increasingly self-conscious within my own home. I meticulously managed which doors I left open, constantly plagued by the feeling that an unseen presence was watching me, and I wanted to avoid putting on a show. The situation gradually intensified. Occasionally, while showering, the distinct sounds of someone else preparing for the day would drift in from the bathroom. The presence consistently carried the energy of a female getting ready in the adjacent room. Soon after, the dreams began, recurring on an almost weekly basis. In these dreams, I engaged in discussions with this entity, firmly explaining that it needed to vacate the premises. Under normal circumstances, I am an incredibly heavy sleeper who can rest through almost anything. Consequently, it was deeply alarming when, immediately following these dreams, I would bolt wide awake. The sensation that someone was standing in the room or lingering directly in the doorway was overwhelming. The experience closely mirrored the awkwardness of having a roommate hanging around your bedroom door. After a few minutes, the intense feeling would gradually subside, suggesting the presence had departed, and I would finally return to sleep. These dreams persisted, eventually escalating into full-blown shouting matches where I loudly demanded that the entity leave my home. About 3 weeks ago, the activity escalated significantly. In the period between the initial dreams and this escalation, several more instances occurred where the feeling of companionship in the apartment drove me to purchase a bathrobe for coverage. One night, the entity and I had another conversation within a dream. Although the interaction felt positive, she refused to reveal what she wanted. I suddenly snapped awake, instantly sensing someone positioned incredibly close to my bed. After spending a minute contemplating my options, I spoke aloud to the empty room, announcing my immediate departure. In response, a distinct sigh sounded right next to my ear. Terrified, I threw on my bathrobe, fled the apartment, and spent an hour driving around the city. I eventually decided that my best course of action was to completely ignore her presence and simply proceed with my life. 2 days later, I witnessed the entity firsthand. I was occupied with household chores, specifically cleaning and handling laundry. My laundry setup is a small closet located just off the kitchen. I was standing inside the space, dressed casually in a t-shirt, boxers, and socks, sorting through the clothes. Suddenly, I felt a strong sensation that someone had just entered through the front door. A millisecond later, I glanced across the kitchen and spotted a woman standing on the opposite side. The sight caused me to scream, and she vanished instantly. She was not dressed in historical attire such as Victorian clothing. Rather, she wore a blue and white shirt reminiscent of the 80s and jeans. I felt frustrated by my own panic, as the sudden fright prevented me from catching a clear glimpse of her face. Angered by the disruption, I began addressing her directly, telling her that I required sleep and that she needed to leave me alone. A few days later, I foolishly requested a sign from the presence. I own an antique bell, and upon returning home from picking up food, I watched it roll across the floor in front of me. The object could not have moved from its location without physical force. Since then, my sightings of her have increased in frequency. I have attempted to return to a strategy of complete ignorance, but it does not help. She has not exhibited any malicious behavior, she simply exists here. I remain stumped on how to handle this and just feel weirded out. An update on March 12, 2019, followed some exploration of the area. My complex is long and winding. I had never ventured to the other side because I don't need to go that way. Well, on the other side of the complex within a tenth of a mile were massive high-tension power lines. Huge power lines, and a substation below it. On that station is a cell tower. I know nothing about the paranormal, but could there be electromagnetic fields or something from there? Also, there's a small brook in the area. On that side of the complex is a standalone ER. From there, I can see almost directly into the ambulance bay. I found no major traumas in the area. But I spoke to maintenance about the unit, and it seems all the tenants leave after a year. We have a transient population moving here for work and school, so maybe just a lot of energy left in the place. They said no major complaints or sudden move-outs. I bought Sage on Amazon, and that is coming, so I'll let everyone know about that. And I am looking for a psychic or medium for a session, but have no idea how to vet someone. Any tips would be welcome. The apartment feels quiet today, I've been keeping music on low and some lights on, mainly the hallway light. Also, I only have one window and a huge slider, but I've kept the shades open on both to let some light in. It makes me feel good. Finally, I'd like to say thank you for everyone that's responded. I've never gone through something like this, so thank you for the helpful comments and the occasional joke to lighten the mood. This has been an unnerving ordeal so far, and being pointed in the right path is calming.
I have a story to share that has truly traumatized me for quite a while now. I feel like this is a good place to tell it because I need to get it out. I am from New Zealand and over here. We have the occasional missing person or a scary murder case, but it is otherwise a very safe country where not much goes on. Because of that, as a 19-year-old girl, I always felt comfortable walking the streets at night or going on hikes alone. Everyone generally looks out for one another. You don't grow up expecting danger in the woods. This happened in the summer of 2019. My boyfriend and I were headed out on a picnic date to a spot we had visited many times. It is called the Karakariki Track. It sits at the end of a very long, windy and rural farm road off of the state highway. To get there, you have to drive for about 15 minutes. You travel deep along a stretch of farmland. At the very end, there is a large cul-de-sac and a massive surrounding farm. The owners of the farm have left the land open to the public. It is a reserve because it is filled with beautiful native trees and wildlife. About a 15-minute walk from the parking lot, there is a small waterfall where you can go swimming. The track is very popular because it is one of the closest swimming spots to Hamilton, the nearest city. It is a scenic and beautiful place where you cross footbridges and pass by creek beds. Farmers still work the land, so there are fenced-off areas the public can enter while the agricultural work continues. On this particular day, my boyfriend and I were really happy. The parking lot was completely empty. It was a super hot summer's day, which was rare for that time, and we felt lucky to have the place to ourselves. As we arrived, we saw the local farmer crossing through the gate on a quad bike with his cows. He was an older man we had spoken to before, since we were regular visitors. He smiled and waved at us as he went about his work. We set off toward the waterfall, crossing a footbridge and passing through a large paddock full of cows. The track there is quite narrow, with the creek sitting right next to it down a steep bank, so you have to be careful where you step. We reached the waterfall. We decided against swimming because we realized we hadn't brought any towels. We turned around and headed back toward the car park. On our way back, we decided to take a small detour. We went down a steep gravel-off ramp from the track. This led to a more private, tree-covered area right by the water. We were enjoying the quiet, kissing and relaxing. I was lying on my tummy reading a book while my boyfriend sat up playing on his phone, rubbing my back and playing with my hair. We were there for about 10 minutes. I turned my head and glanced up the gravel path. Way up on a hill, through one of the farmer's gates, I saw a large man on a quad bike. I didn't recognize him. He was just sitting there, perfectly still, staring down at my boyfriend and me. I don't even want to think about how long he had been watching us before I noticed him. I quietly told my boyfriend what I saw, which made him turn to look as well. As soon as the man realized we were both looking at him, he opened the gate. He started driving down the hill toward us. We immediately got up to leave. We didn't want to have an awkward conversation with a farmer about being romantic on his land. That is what we assumed was about to happen. However, the situation was much worse than a simple scolding. The man came down the track and drove his quad into the creek. He left the engine running while it sat in the water and climbed off. He started talking to himself loudly, saying over and over that he had messed up his quad. He said he had damaged his engine. He seemed agitated before he even got near us. My boyfriend and I were gathering our things to leave when the man began heading toward us. He didn't offer any small talk or friendly greeting. Instead, he immediately asked us if we had seen any fish, explaining that he was looking for some fish to kill. My boyfriend calmly responded that there were no fish in that creek because it was fresh water, suggesting that the man might have better luck trying to catch some eels instead. This suggestion sent the man into a sudden fit of anger. He yelled that he didn't want any effing eels and repeated that he wanted to kill some fish. I made a point not to look the guy in the eye, I didn't want to draw the conversation toward myself because I was already extremely freaked out. I didn't want him to notice my fear. My boyfriend was always the calmer, stronger one in situations like this. But for a brief second, I did look at the man's face. I noticed it looked slightly deformed. Since I work in aged care, I thought it might be Bell's palsy. As I stood back up from tying my shoelace, I noticed something terrifying. There was a pistol tucked into the man's waist. I want to emphasize how shocking this was. That was the first and last time I have ever seen a real-life handgun. It is incredibly hard to get a firearm in New Zealand, especially after the strict regulations following the Christchurch shooting. To make matters worse, he didn't just have one. He was waving a second pistol around in his hand as he talked to my boyfriend about killing fish. He would aim it down at the creek and swing it around. My boyfriend gave me a look that I can only describe as stern. That single look spoke a million words to me. He nodded toward the hill leading back to the track. I grabbed our 2 bags and faked a check of my phone. I told the man that our family was waiting for us back at the car park and we had to go. He completely ignored what I said. Instead, he made a comment about how I had a cool hat on, saying something completely irrelevant to the situation. I said a quick goodbye. I started making my way up the hill. In my mind, I was terrified. I didn't want to look back for fear of seeing my boyfriend get shot. I knew our best bet was for me to get up the hill onto the narrow path where the quad bike couldn't follow, then sprint toward the farmer's house. As I was walking away, the man told my boyfriend that he had a really pretty girl. It felt like all the dark intentions I didn't want to believe were confirmed. I honestly felt like I was going to die. My boyfriend, remaining brave, gave a quick thanks and said we would be off now, then followed me up the hill. Even as we moved away, the man kept talking as if the conversation was still going on. He just stood there, gun in hand, watching us leave. As soon as we were out of his sight, we sprinted as fast as we could all the way back to the car park. When we got there, we noticed empty gun shells. There were over 10 shells scattered on the ground. We ran into 2 girls in bikinis who were arriving and quickly informed them about the man and the gun. They got into their cars and left immediately. We tried to go to the farmer's house to see if he knew who the man was, but the farmers weren't home anymore. The thought of those guns still haunts me. They looked old and rusty. My boyfriend suggested they might have been illegal heirlooms handed down to him. This incident has stayed with me for years. My boyfriend and I haven't been able to return to that spot, which is heartbreaking because it's where we had our first date. For about a year afterward, I had to drive past the road leading to that track during my commute, and it always made me feel physically sick. I could have lost my life or my partner that day. I am forever grateful for the man my boyfriend is. He was able to stay calm and lead us away. He communicated exactly what I needed to do through just a look. He told me afterward that he was ready to die if he had to. Knowing the man had been watching us from the hill and hearing his compliment made it clear that he had very scary intentions. This experience has changed me. I am much more fearful now when I travel into the bush alone, something I had done happily my entire life.